Now, just because we're people of faith, we don't have to pretend that life is always easy. Sometimes life really is like fishing all night and catching nothing. And when I say that, I'm not talking about a charter out of Edgartown where you go out and go around Wasquee, and you go out to Nomans and Gayhead and then back around Lobsterville and come in and you didn't catch anything. I mean what John and James and Peter were up to, which was commercial fishing. It was their livelihood, meaning if they didn't catch anything, they didn't have anything to live on. A dirty and a dangerous job where they just scraped by. And then they'd go home, repair their nets, bail out their boat, take some sleep, and head out again the next night. So what do I mean when I say that life can be like fishing all night and catching nothing? Well, for example, it's like having absolutely too much on your plate with your work and your family and everything else, where it feels like your days are sand running through your fingers and you can't hold on, or it's a blur and you're skating across the ice of life, or you find yourself anxious all the time, wondering what you're forgetting to do, what you're missing out on, what you're not noticing, and scared about how fast it's going. And if that goes on too long, you get up some mornings and you think, I'd rather just pull the blankets over my head and take a break for today. Or it can be surrounded by negativity, where maybe in your relationships or in your community, in your workplace, in your church, it's all, we can't do this, we don't do that. Or you turn on the news and there's just bad news, it seems like. And it seems like the big things in life, the societal things, like global warming, or gun violence, or racism, seem unfixable because people are talking about everything else. You begin to wonder, is it even worth trying to move the dial? Maybe it's best if I just keep my head down and my feet moving and go with the flow and hope for the best. That's like fishing all night and catching nothing. Or maybe you're caring for someone or love someone who has a chronic health problem. And by that I mean, it's not going to get better. And everything is not as good as it used to be, or it could be, or it ought to be. And you find yourself feeling sad for that person because you imagine what their life could be like. Or maybe you have a chronic health problem yourself that's not going to get better. And you wake up every day and even doing the little things feels like rowing a boat into a stiff headwind. That's like fishing all night and catching nothing. Or maybe you've grieved for a lost loved one. And weeks go by and everything just seems blah and gray. And it's hard to be happy or to enjoy your life. And in all my years to date, I've learned that there's only one thing to do when your life feels like you've been fishing all night and catching nothing. And that's do what Jesus says. Go out a little deeper and put the nets over on the other side. To which I know you're thinking, what's he mean? Just come to church and everything's going to get better? Just have a little faith? Just pray harder? To which I would say, those of you who know me know that you've come to the wrong church if that's the sermon you want to hear. What I'm saying is you need to interrupt what you're doing and do the things that Jesus did. And if you think about it in the Gospels, when you hear Christians in the news talking about all the things that Christians shouldn't do, I'd like to have someone talk about what Jesus and the disciples did do, which was go fishing, go out on their boats, walk around in the countryside, Have dinner parties and picnics with friends. Spend lots of time with your friends. I mean, all the stories of Jesus and the disciples, they're just hanging out, walking around in the countryside or out on a boat. They meet people who are very different, and Jesus tries to find the common humanity rather than the differences. Poke authority in the eye when you see injustice. And the ultimate thing about Jesus is really open our hearts and minds and eyes and ears to what God is doing that's presently beyond our imagination. Like that story here. Peter could not imagine that just going out a little further and trying again would do what it did. That's what that story is telling us, is we can't even begin to imagine what God's up to. And yes, praying and worship and meditation can't hurt. To which all of you might be thinking, well, that's way too simplistic, Max. Just walking in the countryside, having dinner parties with friends, imagining what might be possible. And that's why the response of Peter in the lesson is so important, because when he sees what Jesus does, he goes, "Go away from me, Lord, for I'm a sinful man. I've never seen anything like this before." But I say to you, if you have ever had your soul restored, if you've ever had a period in your life where it's been like fishing all night and catching nothing, and then you came out the other side, if you know what redemption feels like, where you felt stuck and now you're free, if you know what resurrection feels like, where you had a time where it just felt dead and then you came back to life, if you know what that before and that after feels like, when you stopped one way and began a new way and everything was different, then you know what I'm talking about. Which brings me to my last 2 points for tonight. If you are right now fishing all night and not catching anything, then try some of the things that Jesus did. You have to take out something to put in this. Walking in the countryside means you can't do Facebook for 15 minutes. Or you come home a little early from work to spend some time having dinner with your family. I know it's hard. I struggle with these things myself. But then there's also the good news, because clearly the message is telling us to go fish for people, being disciples. This is the easy lesson to tell people. If you have friends who are staggering under the burdens of our lives, working too hard, trying to do too much. Everyone says they're crazy busy, or they're running to get nowhere. You've heard the metaphors. Then we're supposed to tell them what faith has done for us, how it's lightened our load and made it easier to be us, and invite them to try to give that life